My wife and I were together for 20 years when a train derailed 2 miles from our home. It was full of chlorine gas, so when it crashed, a massive toxic cloud formed. We were eating dinner with our 17-year-old son, who was telling us about his day at school. The television was off, and our cell phones were in another room. Then we heard the sirens of the fire chief's car, dragging through our neighborhood, telling everyone on a megaphone to evacuate their homes due to the toxic chemical cloud heading right for us. Once we gathered enough supplies and clothes for a few days and got in the car, we realized that we were one of the last families to leave. Trash was split all over the neighborhood from fallen trash cans, and there weren't any cars in sight. After sitting in traffic for 7 hours, half expecting the cloud to come up behind our car, we finally arrived at Camp Rafiki. It was a summer camp for children, turned into a much-needed respite for hundreds of families. We were assigned 3 cots right beside each other, among a sea of other cots. We got freshened up, and were given any toiletries we forgot at home. Meals were cooked using the camp's kitchen. It really felt like a safe haven, but that feeling would disappear for me as soon as I remembered our home was simmering in a cloud of chlorine. I'd heard stainless steel appliances melt in chlorine gas, so I was devastated. It was going to be a mess in our neighborhood for a while, and I wondered where we were going to stay. My wife started playing the piano in the room for all to hear. There was a crowd of about 30 people around her, listening intently, and even more listening from across the room. She started playing piano as a child, so it soothed her and everyone around her. I could tell she enjoyed the attention, but I was just glad she didn't feel as upset as me. Our son was talking with a group of teenagers around the foosball table. Seeing my family so calm, and even enjoying themselves, suddenly made me feel calm. I went from stressed and tense to relaxed and desperate for some sleep. So I laid on my cot and passed out. I woke up hours later. It was dark outside, and it seemed like everyone was sleeping in their cot except my wife. Her cot was empty, so I took a look around. I found her sitting cross-legged on another man's cot. He was sitting on it with her, awfully close, while she was telling him a story from her childhood. I cleared my throat and asked her to come to bed. She hesitated, and it looked like she tried to think of a reason to stay, but there wasn't any reason I would accept to allow her to continue talking to this guy late into the night. I knew her extremely well by this point, so I knew she knew how bad it was that she was up talking to this guy while I was sleeping. Back at our cots, I asked her why she was talking to him and what they said. She was embarrassed and said it wasn't a big deal, they were just getting to know each other. I asked what she now knew about him. She just said it wasn't important, and laid down to sleep. The next day, many of the survivors were playing volleyball or basketball, including me, my son, wife, and AP. After each game or point, I saw him high-five or fist-bump my wife. She was starting it too, it wasn't just him. Then I saw her go in for a hug. He looked so pleased, but then he saw me glaring at him and walked away. She turned to see me and pretended nothing was wrong. Lunch was served, and with our plates in hand, my wife suggested we sit outside. She led our son and I to the table where AP was sitting. I thought about protesting, but I didn't want to have to explain why in front of our son. I just ate food and listened to what was said. AP mentioned it would probably be one more day at the camp before everyone could return home. My wife looked sad at the thought of going home. I felt super weird when she asked AP if he was ever lonely living by himself. I didn't know how she knew he lived alone, that must have been something they spoke about while I was sleeping. He said his dog kept him company, but he and I both knew it seemed like my wife wanted to keep him company. I stood up and told them I'd like to go on a family walk. My wife had the nerve to ask me if she could stay behind to finish eating. She only had peas on her plate, and her blatant disregard for me and our son was alarming. She was already choosing AP over me. I told her to come with us now, so thankfully she did. On the walk, with our son ahead of us, I asked her what the heck she was thinking. I had to point out all the obvious ways she was flirting with AP, and she still denied that she was flirting or misbehaving. I told her I didn't want her to talk to him anymore. She didn't say anything, but agreed. That was all I needed for her to respect my wishes, even if I was being overprotective. The next day, everything seemed to be going fine, but our son went off with some teenagers for a while. When it was almost time for dinner, I went to find him. He was hanging out by the tree line, and really enjoyed talking to this one girl in particular. I was glad he got the chance to meet her. She was homeschooled in the very same neighborhood as us, but might have never met my son if it hadn't been for the chemical spill. He was feeling great about life, so I just told him to be back in a little while for dinner. When I got back to the building filled with cots and people anxious to eat, I couldn't find my wife. I also noticed pretty quickly that AP was gone too. I searched the crowded building and property around until I spotted them about 15 yards inside the tree line. There was a spot without so many sticks and brush. They were laying on a blanket, trying to stay out of my sight as I approached. I yelled to my wife that I could see her, and she was an idiot. With a raised, booming voice, I asked her what the heck she was doing. My emotions were level 10, but it was almost like I couldn't feel them. I was on autopilot on the inside, because I think if my brain let me feel the full impact of this moment, I would have broken down. My wife stood up sheepishly, clearly ashamed of herself. When she got close to me, she said she was really sorry and wanted to go back with me now. I told her I couldn't just ignore the fact that she was just laying in the woods with AP. He was still laying on the blanket a short distance away, turned away from us, like he was waiting until I left to move. My paranoid brain was telling me he could have easily done something with my wife, because she was only wearing a short dress. She didn't have much clothing resistance against foolish, spontaneous decisions. I stopped her from walking away, and asked her if she just slept with AP in the woods, while I was looking for her son. She said no right away, but she looked like she was about to cry. I asked why she looked like this, but she just ran away, back to the cots. I was getting extremely annoyed, and refused to even speak to AP. My wife was acting like someone who suddenly had no idea how to behave like an adult. I decided as I followed her that she was at least having an emotional affair, and consciously decided to sneak into the woods with him, where they may or may not have had sex. This was grounds for divorce, and it never would have happened if the train didn't derail. That night, as our son slept, I woke up my wife and got her to confess. They did have sex, but it only lasted all but 5 minutes, and she completely regretted it. They waited so long to go into the woods that it literally ended right before I found them. I can't explain how terrible I felt at this moment. I felt like my home was gone, and now my family was too. Then my wife added that she knew AP before this. She'd been over to his house to welcome him to the neighborhood, and a few other times when I was at work. I was fuming. She said they never did anything before this, but I found that very hard to believe, because now, in an emergency situation with her own family, she slept with him. I went over to AP as he slept and whacked him over the head with his hardcover book a few times. He was alarmed. Then I had to make myself stop, so I just went outside to jog around the property. I planned out how I was going to separate from and divorce my wife. When we were cleared to return to our neighborhood, I told her I was going to file for divorce, so she needed to stay somewhere else. She bawled and cried and begged me to forgive her for our son's sake, so she could come home with us and help clean up the mess left behind, so our lives could return to normal. She said 5 minutes of meaningless, mistake sex shouldn't be enough to end 20 years of marriage. I told her it most certainly was, and said she needed to have a conversation with our son, explaining why she wasn't going to be living with us anymore. Our son despised her. He found it extremely hard to believe that I would just break up with her for no reason, which is all she told him. I didn't care if she planned to go with AP or what, but she did tell me she was planning to call her dad. 4 months later, the house I now share with my son was fully stored, with the melted appliances and wiring replaced. I told my son by this point what really happened, so he might be more prepared for his date and future. Obviously, he couldn't think of his mom the same way after that. He was hurt by her actions too, and he let her know about it when she called me in tears, asking to come back home. She hadn't contacted me or our son in that entire time, but she justified that by saying she didn't want to bother us. I told her I already knew from her dad that she didn't stay with him like she said, and as her husband, nearly ex, I deserved to know where she spent the past 4 months. She admitted she'd been with AP some of that time, but she just wanted to come home now. In reality, she'd been staying in AP's uncle's shed while his house was repaired. Once his house was ready to be moved into, he dumped her, because 4 months in a shed was all the time he needed with her. That's when our son grabbed the phone and told her he didn't want his father to take her back, because he deserved better. Then he hung up on her, and I never answered her calls again. OP, your wife's behavior was extremely selfish, inconsiderate, and disrespectful. She found a single man and started talking to him like she was a single woman, even though you were always somewhere nearby. I can only imagine how upset and betrayed you must have been. I am proud of you for how you handled this terrible situation. You refused to go home with her, because her behavior and decisions were unforgivable. She most likely had slept with this man before, and even if she didn't, there was still a connection between them that she never expected you to know about. Your son was right, you do deserve better than that. 20 years should have meant more to your wife. Her loyalty should have been unbreakable. I am glad you and your son managed to get through this together. I wish you both the best of luck and success in life. Thank you for sharing this story. Now let's get into our next story for today. At the age of 38, I still didn't have any children of my own. I was waiting until I knew I had the right woman, and it was the right time. That's when I met my girlfriend for 2 short years. She was 34 and had 2 daughters from a failed marriage. She seemed like a woman who was reeled into a long-term relationship with a bad man due to an unexpected pregnancy and her mother's poor advice. I decided to continue seeing her, and the more we got to talk, the more I fell for her. She was incredibly smart and loved history. She read out loud to her kids every night, and was going to school online to earn her teaching degree. Even though life threw her curved balls, she was trying hard, which was what I respected most about her. Things changed after her sister passed away unexpectedly. My girlfriend became overwhelmed with grief. She felt like she could die at any minute and found it disturbing that all humans ever do is waste time until they inevitably die. She started talking more about the end of the world and clicked on any YouTube videos that mentioned potential war or weapon launches. At night before bed, she started saying she hoped I wouldn't die before her, because she wouldn't be able to handle it. She developed this fear of blood clots forming in her arms, legs, or neck, so she would jump up several times while we watched a movie or relaxed, just to march in place and move her arms around. I realized she had a problem, so I asked her if she'd be willing to seek treatment. She didn't want to go to counseling, but she did believe in God, so I suggested she ask the church for help of some kind. My girlfriend was skeptical she could handle any other weekly activity besides raising the children and doing online classes. I assured her I would watch her kids on the night she went to the church, if they could make her feel better about life. She took my offer, and told me they assigned her a weekly arts and crafts class to teach small children. She was really excited about it, and things started to get better immediately. She seemed more calm, and things stopped stressing her out as much. A few weeks later, though, something changed again. She was calm, but also less observant and sharp. Things that normally wouldn't have confused her suddenly did. She laughed out loud more often. She stopped marching in place, but would go outside randomly to walk around the house a few times. It took me a month before I went outside while she was walking to watch her. I saw her take a puff from a vape pen. She coughed a little. I immediately thought it was a medical vape cartridge, which wasn't legal in our state. I walked up to her and asked how she was smoking one of these. She was hesitant to say anything, and tried to show me it wasn't what I thought it was, but in doing so, I discovered it was. I made a confident guess that each time she stepped outside was to vape without me knowing. She admitted it wasn't just for that, but she enjoyed the walking too. I asked how she was getting these cartridges, and she didn't want to tell me. She said it was no concern of mine, and I should just let her continue what she's doing, because she feels better now. I took this time to mention that we hadn't made love in quite some time, so I was worried that she was getting love from someone else, and that maybe this person was also giving her cartridges. Her jaw dropped and she denied this, but I could tell instantly that I guessed what was happening. She wouldn't admit it, though, and why wouldn't she? If she refused to admit it, she might get to keep living in my house with me serving as her free babysitter. I forgot to mention she was desperate for a place to live when we met, so I let her move in with me pretty fast. Now I felt like a fool, because she was up to something. I ordered a GPS tracker to put on her car. The next time she said she was going to her class, I anxiously watched her location on my phone. I was infuriated at this point, sure that she was taking advantage of me. I watched until she arrived at the crappy motel across from the cemetery. I asked her mom to come watch the kids, and told her what was going on. She was surprised and didn't want to believe me, but she did come watch the kids. I got to the hotel and started filming on my phone. I banged on the door in front of her car, and heard a scramble inside. When AP opened the door, he only had a towel around his waist, and I could see my wife's eyes peeking out from behind the bed. I told her I could see her, and felt my heart twist like a pretzel. I asked if this was the guy she got her cartridges from, and he said it was none of my business. I snapped, screaming in his face that it was most certainly my business. AP just put his hands up, and told my wife it was time to go home to Daddy. Outside she told me she only lied to protect me and the kids, because she didn't trust this guy. There were so many things wrong with that statement. I pointed out that she was a complete idiot for meeting this guy alone in a hotel room, if she didn't trust him. Secondly, I said she didn't need to protect us from that guy, she just didn't want me to know she was sleeping with him in exchange for illegal drugs, all taking place while I watched her kids as she could go to the church. I screamed that she was just using me for a place to live, but I knew now she was a horrible mistake. I didn't love her, because she just proved she didn't love or respect me. She was selling herself for drugs. I left her there, in the motel parking lot. I didn't care if she followed me, but she did. She heard me telling her mom and kids to get the flip out of my house. When they yelled in protest, I called her a lying cheater, among other truthful insults. Eventually, they got the gist and started packing their cars with children and stuff. While they did so, my girlfriend tried telling her mom I didn't want them to live in my house anymore, because I was selfish and evil. I disproved that by showing her mother the video I took. Her mother was furious, and told her daughter I should leave her, after the extreme dishonesty and betrayal. It was just a short while later, while they were all living at her mom's house, that my ex was arrested on drug charges. OP, I am sorry your girlfriend convinced you to let her move in with her kids, only to prove she was a selfish and disturbed woman. She could have resolved these issues, and sought help properly, but she took the route that would benefit her the most, without consideration for her kids or you. I don't believe she realized how important it was for her to avoid two major things: illegal activities as a mother, and infidelity as a girlfriend, who depended on her boyfriend's trust and generosity. She ruined whatever chance you all had for a happy life together, simply because she couldn't handle her grief and mental obstacles in an honorable way. You have a second chance to find true love and have your own children. I appreciate you sharing this story as an example to our viewers. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to both stories for today. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Take care. Before I met Angel, I was not much of a relationship person. I just loved to have fun and satisfy my needs, and that was it. I was terrified of being in a relationship with the wrong woman, especially after everything that happened between my parents and what my father had told me about women. But when Angel came into my life, she ticked all the boxes, and everything seemed right with her. While we were friends, I didn't see one flaw with Angel. I guess it was because I fell in love with her sooner than I imagined, or I was blinded in love. After a few months of being friends, I asked Angel out, and she said yes. We were already so close at this point, and we were inseparable. Her parents knew we were a thing, even when we were not officially dating, and they were only waiting for Angel to break the news to them. When she finally did, they were so happy, and I was even invited for dinner to celebrate our relationship. A year and 6 months after Angel and I dated, I popped the question, and she said yes. I was confident she was the one for me, and I didn't think of spending my life with anyone else. After we married, I rented a bigger apartment, and we moved in together like a couple. I didn't want children because I had seen how so many couples had changed after their first child. Except for being with my father as I grew up, no one else made me as happy as Angel did. We did everything together, and we spent a lot of time with each other. The only time we were not alone was when we were having dinner with my dad, her parents, or our best friends. Meanwhile, my dad gradually accepted Angel after I persuaded him to at least give her a chance, and it worked. On the other hand, our friendship bonds grew stronger. My best friend and I still hung out regularly. I didn't want to be the kind of friend who would abandon his best friend just because I was married, and I tried as much as possible to make time for him. I believed it was good since he and Angel got along well, and I didn't think it would be a problem one day. Throughout the 4 years of our marriage, it was bliss, love, respect, and intimacy. We didn't lack anything, were always happy, and both played roles in our marriage. I would not have believed it if anyone had told me that my Angel was having an affair behind me. Well, I saw things for myself, and that's when I realized that she had been playing me all along. One evening after Angel and I had dinner and we got intimate, she went to bed early because she had been complaining of tiredness the whole evening. I didn't join her in bed because I wanted to watch a murder mystery program I always watched every night. Later that night, I went to bed, but I was struggling with sleep and didn't want to go to the living room to get my phone. If not, I would surf the internet till 3 or 4 in the morning. I left my phone in the living room every night to discipline myself. After I struggled for minutes, I decided to watch a couple of YouTube videos on Angel's phone, and in the middle of the second video I watched, a WhatsApp message popped on her screen from Rick, my best friend. I didn't know it was Rick initially because she saved his number as R and a love emoji. He must have seen her online and thought she was the one. Out of curiosity, I opened the message and it appeared like they were only chatting for the first time that day. Their previous messages were cleared, and I felt that was odd. Just as I was trying to wrap my head around what was happening, Rick sent her a photo, the kind of photo you could only view once. When I opened it, it was a picture of his private part. The picture also said, "Think about this until we meet again." I knew what was happening at that point, but I believed I was either dreaming or having a nightmare. It turned out that Angel and Rick were having an affair this whole time, and I didn't have the slightest idea. We always hung out as a group, and I thought their kindness to each other was because we were all like family. To show my shock, I went to the bathroom and washed my face to be sure of what I had seen. But everything was 100% real. That night, I had several ideas running through my head. I wanted to silently hurt my wife for what she had done, but I didn't plan on spending the rest of my life in prison because of a cheating woman. So I thought of something, and an idea popped. I continued to chat with Rick like I was my wife, and I asked if he would love us to hang out and eat at a particular restaurant the next day at a particular time, and he agreed. I even asked him to wear something provocative for me, and he assured me that he would wear something that would set Angel's body on fire. He thought he was chatting with Angel and didn't know it was me. As usual, at the end of the conversation, he reminded Angel to clear the chat so I would not see it, and I did. The following day, when I woke up, I acted like everything was fine, and I told Angel I wanted to have dinner with her family later that evening. So she phoned her parents and notified them about the dinner. Later that evening, me, Angel, and her parents were there 10 minutes earlier than the time I told Rick, and our foods were not even served when Rick came. Well, let's say he was shocked to see me and Angel's family, and Angel was surprised to see him there. I still pretended everything was good and asked him to join us. I waited for the food to be served, and just as we started eating, I asked questions that made Rick and Angel uncomfortable. I knew they would play innocent, so I stopped beating around the bush and exposed everything they had been doing to Angel's parents. Rick couldn't say a word and couldn't even look me in the eye. He just left. As for Angel, she looked like a panda because her mascara melted due to her tears and gave her a hideous look. She cried and begged and even blamed Rick for manipulating her. There and then, I told her it was over between us, and she could only come to take her stuff from my house. Then I left. She made a scene by crying and running after me at the restaurant, but I was not falling for any of that. I knew her parents would try to come and beg me, and when they did, I respectfully asked them to leave my house. When they refused, I kicked them out. Angel refused to come and take her stuff because she believed her parents could beg me to forgive her, so they ended up going with her stuff that day. We eventually divorced, and I cut ties with her and my best friend, including her family. I heard that her father stopped speaking to her and refused for her to move into their house while we were going through our divorce. I also blocked their lines from calling me, and I blocked Angel and Rick on all our mutual social media platforms. I hate to admit that my dad was right about women, but he felt terrible that I had to hurt that way. We divorced in 2020, and it's been almost 3 years now. I still detest her for wasting 6 years of my life, and I hope she gets dumped by every man she loves in all her life. Right now, I'm focusing more on what makes me happy and spending more time with my dad. I still wish I never met her. OP, your ex-wife and best friends are both terrible people, and it would have been better if you never met them. I'm sorry you had to endure this kind of hurt. No one deserves to be betrayed this way. I'm glad you did the right thing by cutting ties with both of them. I'm glad you're doing what you love and spending time with your father. That's all that matters for now. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Now let's get into our second story for today. My wife and I both met at a bar on a Monday morning. I worked as a bartender, and she came in that morning after she had been fired from a place she worked for a short period. I didn't know that spending the rest of the night with her would lead to something more intense between us. Later that night, we went to a concert, then decided to walk around town because I was interested in her. She was in excellent company, and we discussed the random things adults discussed. After walking for an hour, we went our separate ways, but she was kind enough to give me her contact. We talked the next morning, and a few days later, we met at a coffee shop. I had invited her to come to the bar and spend time with me, but she insisted that she wasn't ready to show her face there for the time being, and I respected her decision. We had more dates after our first coffee date, and meeting her frequently created a chemistry between us. I realized I liked her, and I wasn't someone who liked to be around the bush, so I told her I liked her, and she suggested that we take things slow. Weeks after we met, I got a response from one of the dream companies I had applied to and got a job. I was delighted because I had not gotten the job I wanted after being laid off from my former company. The only problem was the job was in a different town, and I would have to travel back to my hometown if I needed to do something important. Eventually, I took the job, and as I traveled, my ex-wife and I were not a thing yet. We were just close friends, and I knew she liked me too. We were taking things slowly, as she suggested, and we spoke to each other every night before bed. I think 2 months after I traveled for work, my ex-wife broke the news that she had gotten a new job, and we were both so happy. Although the pay was not as good as her previous job, it was better than the hourly menial jobs she did, and she believed she could get promoted fast if she did a great job. Sadly, I could not return to celebrate with her that weekend because I was working overtime, but I promised to make it up to her. Not long after that, she started giving me signals that she wanted a stronger relationship between us, and I was forced to ask her out again, and this time she said yes. When she finally said yes, I returned home to celebrate with her, and we made intense love that night. It was our first time bonding with each other, and I still have bits of the memories in my head. Because of our different work locations, our relationship became a long-distance one. We spoke to each other every day and night, sent pictures, and even got intimate on the phone. I also sent flowers and chocolates to her workplace whenever I wanted to surprise her, and most times, I would send her money to buy whatever she wanted. Aside from being a beautiful soul, one of the reasons I loved my wife was because she was a giver too. My gifting was not one-sided because she would occasionally send gifts to my house or have something I loved delivered to me at work. While we dated, we didn't have any issues, and I tried as much as possible to travel back to my hometown every weekend or she would come over. We were very happy, and we loved each other so much. Both our families knew we were dating, and they loved us both. We both got decent pay, and we were able to support our families. Even with our long-distance relationship, I didn't really feel her absence because we did video calls all the time, and after 9 months of traveling miles to see each other, I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. Eventually, we married, but I couldn't return to her hometown, and she couldn't come to me either. I was working on getting a transfer since it wasn't possible on her end, but things did not move as fast as I wanted. Sadly, we spent the first year of our marriage traveling back and forth to be with each other, and we jumped on the slightest holiday to spend time with each other. After the first year of not getting a positive response from the organization I worked for, my ex-wife, and I lost hope of getting the transfer. I even started sending my application to companies that needed my skill in her hometown, and I was hoping something would pop up for me. 2 months later, something popped up, but it wasn't in my hometown. The organization I worked for approved my transfer, and I was getting a raise. When I got the news at first, I was so happy, and I wanted to tell my wife about it, but on second thought, I wanted to see how she would react when she saw me, so I kept it to myself. After everything was settled at my organization, I left on a Thursday. My intention was to go to my wife's office and surprise her in person, which I did. On getting to her place of work, I drove to the parking lot, stepped out of my car, and was about to call her when I noticed something. There weren't a lot of cars parked in that area of the parking lot, so it was easy to see my wife's car. As funny as it sounds, I ended up being the surprised one because I saw my wife and her boss in the front seat making out with each other. I knew it was terrible when my legs felt numb and I could no longer move. My heart almost stopped beating, and I was devastated. Seeing that destroyed every bit of happiness and excitement in me, and I could not believe she was cheating on me after all the promises we made to each other. For once, I never thought of cheating on my wife or being with another woman. I won't say I was not tempted, I was, but I couldn't give in to the temptation because of how much I loved her. Without overthinking, I made a video, took pictures of my wife and her boss, and drove out of the parking lot. I returned to our house, the one I rented after we got married, and she was so happy when she returned home to see me. She even asked why I didn't tell her I was coming home on a weekday, so she could cook me something special. I played along, but deep down, I was hurting, and the way I looked at her changed after what I saw. We didn't even get intimate that night because I claimed I was tired and needed to rest. I gave her the same excuse the following day, and immediately she left for work. I sent the pictures and video I had taken the previous day to her HR. Later that day, she called me in a panic, and she said she had been fired and didn't know why she lied. I acted concerned and asked her to come home immediately. When she did, I broke the news and told her someone had informed me that she was cheating and I had proof. Her boss was also fired, but she didn't mention it because she knew it would confirm what I had said. She didn't think I was serious until I told her I was divorcing her. Instead of owning up to her mistake, she started calling me names and saying I believed what others said about her instead of believing her. She even claimed someone who hated her must have framed her, and she could prove that. I told her I was sorry and kicked her out of the house. She made a scene outside but left after standing there for hours. It made me happy to see her in such a miserable state, but I was still hurt to find out she was having an affair with her boss, and only God knew how long that had been going on. We eventually divorced, and I even sent her parents the photos and videos I made that day. Her parents were very religious people, and they could not stand the sight of what they had seen. They disowned her after the photos and videos came from an anonymous account, which was me. Eventually, I divorced my wife, and the rumor of our short-term marriage and her infidelity with her boss spread like wildfire within our town. Even worse, she was blacklisted and could not get a job in any organization within our town. She tried numerous times to get employed but got nothing. Somehow, it dawned on her that she needed to change location to get a job, but because of her financial situation, she could not afford to leave town because everyone shunned her, including some of her friends. The last time someone talked about her, I heard she was planning to go back to college for a change in profession, but I don't know how true it is, and I don't care. Because of her, I have found it difficult to fall in love with any woman I meet because I think they will all break my trust and cheat on me like my wife did. It's normal to have your fears after what happened, but you cannot put your life on hold because of what your wife did to you. Sadly, you didn't even get to enjoy your marriage, and just when things fell into place for you, she ruined everything. I wish you all the best and hope you are able to heal from this. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. I was absolutely devastated when I found out my wife had been cheating on me while I was away on business. To make matters worse, she was still cheating on me when I returned home. I had no idea what to do or where to turn. For 10 years, our marriage was rock solid. We never fought. We never even argued. It was perfect. And then one day, it felt like it all fell apart. It happened so suddenly. I still can't believe it. One minute we were happy and in love, and the next we were getting divorced. All I know is that our marriage just wasn't as strong as I thought it was. And now I'm left feeling angry and betrayed. I trusted my wife implicitly and she let me down. I thought our marriage was unshakable, but it turns out it was nothing more than an illusion. I started noticing little cracks in our marriage a few months ago. It was nothing serious at first, just the occasional disagreement over something trivial. However, lately the cracks have been getting bigger and more frequent. We quarrel over things that we used to agree on, and we often go to bed angry with each other. I don't know what happened, but something has definitely changed. I tried to talk to my wife and spice things up, but she just wasn't having it. She said she was too tired, that she had a headache, that she just wanted to watch TV or some other excuse. But I know what she really meant was that she didn't want to talk to me, that she'd rather zone out in front of the television than have a conversation with her own husband. No matter what I did, I couldn't win back my wife's affection. I tried buying her flowers, cooking her dinner, and even tried taking her on vacation. Nothing worked. It was like she had someone else in her life that she loved more than me. I began to wonder if she was having an affair. I asked her about it, but she denied it. I never really paid much attention to my wife's phone habits. I figured she was just like me and only used her phone for occasional calls and texts. However, recently I've started to notice her acting really suspicious with her phone. She's always looking at it when I'm not around and she's quick to put it away if I enter the room. She's always seen to be spending more time on social media and she's frequently receiving calls and texts late at night. I've started to suspect that my wife is up to something after witnessing her behavior with her phone. She's been acting strange and she's been very distant. Dead bedroom has set in. I tried to ask her what's wrong, but she just brushes me off and says that she's fine. I don't want to accuse her of anything without proof, but I also can't just let it go. I had been wondering for weeks what my wife was up to. She was always on her phone, not wanting to do anything with me, but she would go out with her friends and she continued to be secretive about her phone calls and text messages. Fast forward a few days and I made the decision on the way to work to hire a private investigator. I didn't have the time to keep wondering what my wife was up to. Within a few days, the investigator had given me a report that confirmed my worst fears. My wife was cheating on me, and get this, she would have this man come to our house and pick her up while I was at work. So after he told me this, I pondered the idea of installing cameras, but there was no need because the only thing that happened at my house was he would come to pick her up, he would sit in the car and wait. Then my wife would come out and they would leave. I gave the private investigator explicit instructions to get as much footage as possible. He followed her for 1 week and captured everything on video. I was shocked when I saw the footage of her kissing another man. She had told me that she was hanging out with friends, but it was clear that she wasn't hanging out with friends. Now that I had footage of my wife cheating on me, my next step was to contact an attorney to see what my options were here in the state of New Jersey, which is an at-fault state for divorce. My lawyer explained that I would likely be able to use the footage as evidence in court and that this would probably result in a more favorable divorce settlement for me. Additionally, my lawyer suggested that I file for divorce as soon as possible. As the longer I waited, the more likely it would be that my wife could claim that the footage was not relevant to our marriage. Ultimately, I decided to follow my lawyer's advice and I filed for divorce shortly thereafter. The good thing about this upcoming divorce, we don't have any kids in this marriage. She has 2 daughters from a previous marriage. Oh yeah, she was married for 3 years before and had 2 kids in 3 years. It's kind of a relief, to be honest. I'm glad we didn't have any kids together. It would have just made the divorce that much more complicated. So in a way, I guess you could say that her having kids from a previous marriage is a good thing. It's one less thing for us to worry about. I am in my late 30s and so is my soon-to-be ex-wife. As the days go by after filing for divorce, my wife is still claiming she is going out with her friends. I still have the private investigator follow her and he will continue to follow her until she is served with divorce papers. At this point, my feelings for my wife had all but dissipated. I am just trying to make sure I have a strong case for my divorce. I was returning from my business trip when I got the angriest phone call from my wife. She had just been served with the divorce papers and she wanted to know why I had filed for divorce. I told her that she would find out in court why I had filed, but I could see that she was already upset. When I finally walked in the door from my business trip, my wife accosted me and demanded to know again why I had filed for divorce. Not wanting to get into a fight, I again told her that she would find out everything at the divorce hearing. However, she was not content with this answer and insisted that I tell her what happened. Reluctantly, I explained that I had caught her cheating on me and that I had decided to end our marriage as a result. I told her that I don't want to try anymore. I can't do this anymore. You destroyed our marriage. I have been trying to be a good husband for 10 years and I am done. My wife started to cry, beg and plead for another chance, but I told her I didn't want to. She told me she would change. She would do anything I wanted. She would get help. She would go to counseling, but I said it was too late. I told her that the betrayal is too much for me to overlook and there was nothing she could do to change that. She pleaded with me to stay, but I told her it was over and left the house. While I was driving, she was pleading with me to come home, crying and saying everything under the sun. She even brought up marriage counseling again. I told her to stop and that I was not going to change my mind. Then all hell broke loose. She started calling me every name in the book and accused me of being a terrible husband. She said I was never there for her and that she was done putting up with my crap. I told her she was being ridiculous and that she was just upset because I had made the decision to file for divorce. We argued back and forth until finally I had enough and hung up on her. That's why after I hung up on my soon-to-be ex-wife, I went to a hotel. I didn't have anywhere else to go. My parents live in another state and most of my friends live hours away and I didn't feel like driving that far. So I left the marital home and got a hotel room, which will probably be my home for a bit. I am still in shock over everything that's happened. It all happened so fast. One minute we had a solid marriage or so I thought, and the next we are divorcing, and I am a bad husband. Wow, as the divorce hearing inches closer, I find myself becoming more and more anxious. Although I have been the one pushing for the divorce, I can't help but feel a sense of dread at the thought of going through with it. My attorney asked me about our financial situation, and I have to break the news to him that my wife doesn't work and I am the sole provider. He then asked me about the house, and I tell him it is a rental. We sold our house a few years ago, and we just never looked for a replacement. My attorney tells me it's probably a good idea that we don't own a house. Even though New Jersey is an at-fault state, the judge would probably make us sell the house to split the proceeds. He says you have been married for over 10 years. She doesn't have access to financial resources, and you can't prove that she was using the money you gave her for her affair. The day of our divorce hearing was a shit show. Somehow she had an attorney and their attorney tried to get the evidence from the private investigator thrown out. I was never so angry in my life, the nerve of that woman, but my attorney told the judge that my private investigator compiled evidence up until my wife was served with divorce papers and showed the court that my wife was still cheating up until she was served. My attorney argued that since she was still cheating, the footage should be allowed and entered into evidence. The judge agreed. My wife was furious and vowed to get revenge. Before the divorce hearing concluded, my wife was given a choice: either stay in the house and continue to pay rent or move out. It's been 3 long months since my divorce was finalized. During that time, I've tried to keep my head up and focus on rebuilding my life. So you can imagine my surprise when a few of my coworkers came up to me and told me they seen my ex-wife working at a local department store. It had been almost 4 months since my divorce, and in that time, I had barely left the house. When I had to go to a local Best Buy, my ex-wife ran up behind me from the department store where she worked. She must have seen me from a window or something. I was completely taken off guard. She was crying and hugged me tightly, begging me to take her back. At first, I was tempted. After all, we had been married for over 10 years and I still had feelings for her. But then I remembered all the reasons why we had divorced in the first place. The main culprit was her cheating on me and disrespecting me. I gently pushed her away and continued to walk toward Best Buy. As the months went by, I learned that my ex-wife had been fired from her job after she was caught stealing. The company decided not to press charges and she ended up moving back home to Oklahoma. She ended up moving in with an old friend of hers who eventually kicked her out, and she ended up back home with her mom. I was surprised that she was able to get away with all of this, but I guess her mom was able to help her out. In any case, it's been a few months since I've seen or heard from her, and I'm starting to feel like maybe she's finally out of my life for good. But thinking my ex-wife was out of my life for good was short-lived. She showed up at my door one day out of the blue, and I have to say, I was shocked to see her. She said she wanted to talk and I reluctantly let her in. She told me she had been going through a tough time and needed help. Against my better judgment, I helped her out financially. Afterwards, she started showing up more often and becoming more demanding. I soon realized that she hadn't changed one bit and that she was just using me. I finally told her that I can't support her. I am not her husband and she is no longer my responsibility. I also told her to stop coming to my house. Then she says she will always come to our home. At that moment, I realized that this woman is not going away. It sounded like she was going to be stalking me. After my encounter with my ex-wife, I went down to the courthouse and filed to get a restraining order against her. It was a hard decision to make, but I knew it was necessary to protect myself. The process was fairly straightforward and the restraining order was granted relatively quickly. In the meantime, I had to take measures to keep myself safe, such as changing my locks and installing a security system. It was an uneasy time, but fortunately the restraining order was effective and my ex-wife stayed away. Looking back, I'm glad I made the decision to get a restraining order. It gave me a peace of mind and allowed me to move on with my life. It's been 3 months since she showed up at my door and I never saw her again.